Alright everyone, it's time, thankfully, for the final video that I ever have to make on the topic of Charles Manson, after years of people messaging me, what did Charlie think about this? What did Charlie do here? As though I was some sort of self-proclaimed expert on the topic, when primarily I was posting his music and saying, hey, I just think he's innocent of murder. And I hold to that. So for anybody who's not aware of my own beliefs, of course I made a video a few days ago because he was dying at that point, or at least that was the report. Now, of course, he's conked out. He's finally bought the farm. His suffering's over. I happen to believe that Manson did not commit, was not responsible for, rather, the Tate LaBianca murders. I base this on the motive involved doesn't make sense. Like the took LSD and heard secret Beatles messages doesn't make sense. Music as motive doesn't make sense. The prosecution confusingly used both of these motives, despite the fact that it would seem that one of them would be a very angry but ultimately psychologically sane response. The other one would be like, well, he took so many drugs he blew his mind out. I'm not sure how they can coexist. It doesn't make sense that there'd be these two motives. The Shrek explanation is that the blood writing on the walls and things like that was basically Atkins' idea. Watson was the one primarily orchestrating the murders, and that Manson's involvement only amounted to telling Watson he should go and requisition drugs from Jay Sebring. When he didn't get him, he went berserk, killed everyone, and Tex Watson killed all 7 people, just so you know. Atkins never killed any of the people at either of the scenes. Manson never killed any of them. A lot of people think they know about the case, but what they know essentially boils down to nothing more than a flawed oral retelling of the bare rudiment of the case. They say, well, it starts with Manson, he's born crazy, he continues to be crazy, goes off and kills some people after forming a cult, now he's crazy in prison, the end. By the way, he stabbed Sharon Tate's stomach, or forced Atkins to do it. Now, he told his family to go kill people for him for some unknown reason. The number of motives that I've heard from people who have not studied the case are vast. It's not just, hey, he got stiffed on music by Terry Melcher, so he ordered his followers to go get revenge, which doesn't make sense, by the way, and isn't true. Or they were all on drugs, and he kept telling people, hey, we're gonna go start a race war. And somehow these two things, I guess, in his mind, supposedly were related. Bugliosi used the case basically as a way to make millions of dollars. He's, of course, already dead. I think he died in 2015, was it? Or 2014? So Manson managed to outlive him. I think they're talking about... Atkins is dead. I think they're talking about, was it Van Houten they're thinking of? Or one of these others they're thinking of pardoning now, or letting her go on parole. I would say, yeah. Anyone who didn't physically... Tex Watson's the only person who physically murdered anyone. He's the only one who should never get parole. Manson sat there and rotted in prison anyway most of his life. But here's the truth of it. Manson wouldn't have really cared to know that after he died, everyone basically was just saying, oh, thank goodness he's finally gone. Most of these people didn't know anything about the case, so their opinion on it really doesn't matter that much. Most of the time you ask them, what did Manson believe in and what actually happened at the Tate residence? They're like, I don't know. I'm not sure. I just know he's evil and crazy. He's like, he tried to start a race war. Well, if you haven't studied it all, how would you know that? You haven't even heard Manson in his own words speaking. I don't mean the book. I mean actually from an interview. Then again, most of it was incoherent. That was taken as further evidence of his madness. Of course, he was found competent to stand trial. That would negate the idea that he was a lunatic. I hope you understand that. Furthermore, in his parole hearings, I think it was the 2004 parole hearing that was on YouTube, and it was actually openly stated by the psychiatrist that examined him, yeah, he's sane. He doesn't have any mental illnesses at all. I think that primarily it's because he's bored, acting out to amuse himself. He's like, well, I know I'm never going to get out of here. Why don't I just act crazy? It's going to be funny. I can shock the whole nation. And it gets him attention. And then people write into him, and they send him stuff. They're like, hey, Charlie, yeah, I said, here's $10. And he's like, well, that's pretty good. And then he can keep in the good graces of all the younger prisoners, and maybe even hire a couple people to make sure he doesn't get stabbed in the back. Didn't help him too much with that one Hare Krishna that lit his head on fire. He made a song about that. So that's the truth of the Manson case. Manson was a con, an arsonist, a pimp, a thief, fraud, everything else under the sun, basically, but he was no murderer. His crimes, even according to Bugliosi himself, I'm not sure how many people know this. Bugliosi, in his own book, and in his own little spiel about the book, in video form, of course, came right out and admitted, hey, it was odd, because prior to this, all of Manson's crimes were like really petty for them. They weren't really violent crimes. Fraud, he cashed several checks, apparently, that were faked, and managed to rob the money that way. Busted open a stamp machine at one point in order to sell the stamps for a discount price, I guess, or illicitly. Simple assault in a couple of cases, and that was basically it. Other than his juvenile record, as far as adult crimes, it was surprisingly, it was basically forgery and fraud and stealing cars and stuff. It wasn't really, oh yeah, he was knifing people in an alleyway to take their wallets. And Bugliosi was amused, actually, that this was the case. He couldn't figure out why someone who was apparently getting by on nonviolent, less risky forms of crime would suddenly command all of his followers to go kill. Well, it never happened. That's why there's a discrepancy there. You can't control people's minds with drugs. The others there at the ranch, his so-called family, they were the ones that were doped up to their eyeballs and decided to go out and requisition $8,000 worth of mescaline or something like that. And of course Tex, who was violent anyway, he was the one that engaged in violence. He was the football captain person at the Helter Skelter Ranch, the Spawn Ranch, which no longer exists. It's been bulldozed, by the way, after a fire destroyed part of it. He was the one that killed everyone. He was the one that was violent. Manson, apparently for the most part, sticks to, hey, I dealt drugs today. I stole a car. It was pretty awesome. And now I bought more drugs because I sold the car. Now, here, give me $50 and I'll give you this old car, and then I'll go get, a bunch of acid. Back then, $50 would have gotten you quite a bit of it, I take it. Like 50 tabs, probably. That's what Manson was up to. And he didn't really fucking care. He was in prison anyway. So all these people acting, they try to seem tough, I think. They're like, oh, well, Manson was such an asshole. Ha ha, I'm glad he's dead. Well, yeah, he's dead. He's also an old man. He was 83 years old. Not exactly the young, wild-eyed hippie cult leader that people said he was in the 60s and 70s. Back when I was a kid, I can remember, Manson was in the news a few times. In the 90s over the Atwa stuff, sort of the environmentalist fringe, and they're like, oh, he's trying to create an army of evil hippie environmentalists now, and using IRC chat. I remember for a while, I think they had a webcam set up in his cell. Actually, they had a website that was live broadcasting there. I know, in return for like donations or some shit. You can write to Charlie here, send him some money to keep this site running if you find it fun. I'm pretty sure the original Atwa page had a live webcam, actually, for a while back in the late 90s. Back when they were primitive. Back when it was definitely in 240 or less. It wasn't exactly in modern high definition, if you know what I mean. Poor Manson. No, I say that unironically, because everyone wants to scapegoat him. You gotta realize one other thing. Again, it's like these one-dimensional caricatures that people make of people that they dislike. Manson is reckoned to be like a Nazi by the left. He's also reckoned to be an evil hippie by the right. He had no friends. Basically, anybody who wasn't just involved in crime and using a lot of drugs couldn't possibly have found anything redeeming in him. And he was a con. He was definitely a criminal. A career criminal, an unrepentant one. He never repented for any of those crimes he actually did commit. The one crime that he never had to repent for, and never did as well, were the Tate LaBianca murders, because he wasn't really involved. He wasn't even involved in the Tate scene, and at the LaBianca scene, beyond tying people up for what he thought was going to be basically a faked robbery, in order to give plausible deniability to the LaBiancas, who were dealing drugs, which is why Watson was fucking there in the first place. Other than that, of course, he was uninvolved as well. Watson went ballistic a second time because, again, he got stiffed on drugs. Watson quickly realized that the drug supply was apparently low at that particular moment. Once the LaBiancas were gone, and Atkins once again had her way there with the blood writing sort of bullshit, Manson said, oh, fuck, well, we're screwed now. Eventually they're going to come down on our heads. We're going to go out into the desert. And then, of course, the helter-skelter stuff. began to emerge. Basically, I think, in the end, it was a tale of Manson trying to calm down a bunch of really, really jumpy gated community college kids that had come to live with him after they had like broken home problems. And they were on drugs and they were fucked out and getting paranoid. And he started telling them weird stories to try to keep them calm. Like, oh yeah, don't worry, you know, the Beatles told me, and come out here, we'll be safe in the desert. You know, all that stuff, it's going to blow up anyway pretty soon. Just fucking get on the doom buggy in order to keep him from doing stupid things. And then, of course, they got caught. And then that sort of tale-telling, I think, backfired on him. I have no doubt that after the fact, he told them about, like, helter-skelter stuff. I think it was his idea of a joke. I honestly think that he was just joking with them, and they took it way, way too fucking far. And I would be very, very surprised if he actually mentioned anything like that before the Tate murder. I'd be very, very surprised. I happen to not believe the testimony of people like Atkins and these others, Krenwinkel and Tex Watson. Tex Watson apparently at one point, according to Nicholas Schreck's book anyway, at one point he was so high out of his mind that he was wandering down the road around one of these streets in the heights outside of Hollywood and was just making beep beep noises because he was on Brigmansia at least. He was on Devil's Breath. He was probably on acid at the time. And he was just zonked out to the point where he wasn't even really self-aware. So I'm not sure that that's the kind of person whose testimony a modern court would listen to. In a modern court of law, if a bunch of people started saying, yeah, he heard secret messages in a Beatles song and, you know, yeah, we were on a lot of drugs and he was using it to control us, wouldn't a competent defense lawyer say, Your Honor, how can we accept the testimony of people who were high as balls at the time? The testimony should be thrown out. It's not reliable. Because it could just be that they were so high that they killed a bunch of people, forgot about it, and now they're scared and trying to blame somebody else who apparently was at least semi-sober at the time. Wouldn't you think that that's what a modern defense attorney would do? But Manson never had a competent defense attorney. He tried to represent himself. And he did okay until he realized, hey, you know, the prosecutor's not going to be sequestered in a cell with equal access as you have to, like, legal books. And he, you know, of course, he wanted to grandstand about that because I think he enjoyed the attention a little bit at the time. Then they gave him a totally incompetent public defender who was at a party with Bugliosi not long after. Yeah, he was going to a party with him, had a great time. Yeah, I'm sure that was really, really well-argued case. Didn't bring up the fact that all of the anecdotal tales were by people who were dealing and using drugs frequently. That should have been the main defense. Hey, everyone there was totally drugged out. How the hell can we accept their testimony? You're saying LSD allows people to mesmerize one another, well, why can't it erase their memories then? What about that particular claim? And of course, the latter is probably more adequate than the former, actually, from a medical standpoint. No, you can't control others' minds, make them do things that would be averse to their character by giving them LSD. But you could certainly make someone have difficulty recollecting an event properly. Like Tex Watson saying over the years that there were 3 different ways that he entered the Tate home. Did you know that? In his official testimony, I think he said the front door was unlocked. In his book, I think he said he slid open the back door, like slid open the screen and slid in. Then at another time, offhand, he mentioned that he was just let in to the building, which makes sense the most because, of course, drinks were offered to the people that were there. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense since supposedly none of them knew each other. Now, a bunch of hippies wander into an upper-class neighborhood and decide to sit down, and they're offered drinks. Wow. Yeah, that's quite something. How hospitable of Miss Tate, who was, 8.5 months pregnant. Very hospitable of her. Her husband's away and she's entertaining a few friends. None of them do any drugs, by the way. Totally sober, according to everyone, including Polanski, who we now know is a pervert. Very hospitable to offer them wine. Yeah, it was a wonderful hostess. So yeah, there's the truth of the Manson case in the last video I ever have to make. It's just a little spiel there. Manson's not crazy. Well, wasn't, I should say, because, of course, now he's a corpse. By the way, they'll probably cremate him, so there won't be a grave for all of his so-called friends to go and, like, do the G.G. Allen thing and, like, pour whiskey all over it or leave him weed or hash cookies or something. It's probably not going to be a grave because there's no legal heir. None of these people ever said, yeah, Manson's kid, ever proved that they were, so they can't requisition and bury the body. The state will decide, and you know damn well they're going to cremate it. They're going to be like, well, if we bury it somewhere, it's going to become a shrine to a bunch of crazy people. We're just going to cremate him. Also, they wouldn't want someone, I think, to dig him up as a trophy or, like, remove his skull. They wouldn't want him to get dug up and, like, put on display. Like, there was that bullshit about Star saying, oh, she's trying to get Manson's body so she can put it, like, preserve it as a mummy in a museum for cult purposes. And that was his so-called son that said that, who probably is not related to him in any way. He just looks vaguely similar and I guess doesn't know who his dad was. So he's like, oh, Charlie must be my dad. The mom said she was in that general area at the time, so, you know, I must be Manson's child. Maybe you're Tex Watson's child. How the fuck would you know? Tex Watson sort of looks whacked out, too. Maybe you're Grogan's son, Steve Grogan. Did you ever think about that? The one that, he was, I think he was a convicted child molester and car thief. Looks Manson-esque a little bit, even sounded a little bit like him. That's why a lot of people get confused. The Family Jams, that's Clem singing. That's not Manson actually singing, but he sounds similar to the stuff you get like on Lie. And I think he was touring with, who was it, Garth Brooks or some major country singer? He was actually the guitarist. I think still does that occasionally. Maybe he's your dad. So you go after, I mean, he has more money. Charles Manson died completely broke. Apparently in his possession was some art and a couple of guitars. Those are worth a pretty penny. Some guard tried to sell one of his guitars for like $9 grand once on eBay and it got taken down. I remember that. It was actually Manson's guitar, signed and everything. So it's interesting. Now people can find some other, you know, evil scapegoat. I know Hitler has been dead a while and they still use him and like they still use Satan. Charles Manson would clock in a close 3. I think Trump is probably up there at this point for a lot of people, which is funny. But Charles Manson's bipartisan. He hated all politics, and people of all political spectrums hated him as well. I mean, you're casting your hate on someone you never personally interacted with. I find that a little funny. If it's a politician, if it's someone who's like a public figure, that's one thing. But someone who's locked in a cell and doesn't really have any power, you have to concoct like a total folk story about him having mesmeric hippie powers in order to justify really caring about what he does. Like mostly what he did is piss on guards and sneak cell phones in so that he could have crazy phone conversations. I bet, by the way, you're probably going to get all sorts of old recordings now, like phone calls and stuff that people have waited on. They'll probably try to sell them. They've done that before with various people over time. Oh, here's a CD I burned of my hour-long conversation with Charlie back in the 1980s. It's wonderful stuff. Here's a never-before-seen interview that I snuck out of Corcoran. Be wary, though, it might not be what it pretends to be. I know some of those little things with string that he made, like the little scorpions and shit he made with like loose twine, a lot of those were faked. Manson didn't actually make those. They're made by other prisoners and then sold in Manson's name, and they got a cut out of it. They all shared the money. Probably lucrative. They probably made thousands of bucks a year doing that stuff. Some major money, actually. They'd buy some toiletries, buy Reese's Pieces. That's about all. Peace out.